Good morning, faithful listeners, and welcome to the Bible Explained podcast on this lovely Monday morning. Today we're going to be continuing with the story of Hezekiah and the king of Assyria. And I'm really looking forward to talking about today's portion, so stay tuned. Well, thank you guys so much for the understanding with me taking a couple days off last week. You know, with the passing of my mother-in-law, things just were very busy, and I needed to be there to support my husband. Also, we had family in town, a lot of funeral preparations and things like that. The funeral was on Saturday, so I thank you everybody who has prayed for my family through this time. But I'm not going to lie, I'm excited to get back into the podcast because I really love this story, and I was so excited to talk about it 2 weeks ago when it came up because it's one of my favorite stories in the Kings. But before I begin today's episode, I do have to give a recap because it's been a while since we talked about this portion of scripture, and some of you guys might not even remember what's going on, and I get you because I almost didn't remember what was going on either. So last time we were in 2 Kings 18. And we talked about how Israel had been completely taken over by the Assyrians. Assyria basically came in, took control of Israel, and displaced a good majority of the population of the Israelites and brought in foreigners to live in Israel instead of the Israelites. While all that's taking place, you know, Judah, which is down south, like on the border of Israel, is going through some trouble of its own because Assyria starts trying to attack Judah now. But the king of Judah at this time is named King Hezekiah, and he's actually a very good king. He's one of the few kings that it's mentioned that he followed in the ways of King David. And that is a compliment because King David was a man after God's own heart. King David was a man who worshiped Yahweh until his dying breath. And it says that Hezekiah was similar to David in that way, that he did not depart from worshiping Yahweh all the days of his life. So King Hezekiah was a good king down in Judah. And when Assyria comes down to try to attack Judah, they were somewhat successful, actually. They were able to take a few cities down in Judah, some of the fortified cities. But the last holdout was Jerusalem, the largest fortified city in Judah. And obviously the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, wanted it for himself. So Sennacherib sends his Rabshakeh, which was an Assyrian title for a captain. He sends his Rabshakeh to Jerusalem to give them all a message. And this Rabshakeh knew how to speak Hebrew. So he speaks this scary message to the Hebrews in Jerusalem very loudly. And he says, look, all of you guys in Jerusalem right now, just give up. Just give up because the king of Assyria is great. He has been able to take all of these other cities that you know of. They don't exist anymore. Even Samaria up north in Israel has been taken by Sennacherib. So I encourage all of you to just wave the white flag and come out with your hands up, and we will actually treat you very well. We're just going to completely displace you from your home, take everything that you own, and put you somewhere else. Then the Rabshakeh continues on in Hebrew so that everybody can understand. He says, do not rely on Yahweh your God, because none of the other gods of all the other nations were able to stand against King Sennacherib. So what makes you think that your God Yahweh is any stronger than any of these other gods? Our gods in Assyria are stronger than your God. Your God is not going to be able to stand up against us. So when the Hebrew people hear the words of the Rabshakeh, they're obviously very distressed, and they go back to King Hezekiah to tell him everything that the Rabshakeh said. And so that is where we continue on in 2 Kings 19. And we're going to be reading verses 1 through 19 today, and I'll be reading as I usually do from the WEB. When King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and went into Yahweh's house. He sent Eliakim, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. They said to him, Hezekiah says, today is a day of trouble, of rebuke, and of rejection, for the children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to deliver them. It may be that Yahweh your God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master has sent to defy the living God, and will rebuke the words which Yahweh your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. Isaiah said to them, "Tell your master this. Yahweh says, don't be afraid of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, and he will hear news, and will return to his own land. I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land." So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he had departed from Lachish. When he heard it said of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, "Behold, he has come out to fight against you," he sent messengers again to Hezekiah, saying, "Tell Hezekiah, king of Judah, this. Don't let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you, saying, Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands by destroying them utterly. Will you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, which my fathers have destroyed? Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the children of Eden who were in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, of Hena and Eva?" Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. Then Hezekiah went up into Yahweh's house and spread it before Yahweh. Hezekiah prayed before Yahweh and said, "Yahweh, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, even you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, Yahweh, and hear. Open your eyes, Yahweh, and see. Hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to defy the living God. Truly, Yahweh, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore, they have destroyed them. Now therefore, Yahweh our God, save us, I beg of you, out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Yahweh, are God alone." So 2 Kings 18 flows perfectly into 2 Kings 19, because it says right here, when King Hezekiah heard it, meaning the words that the Rabshakeh had said, he tore his own clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and went into Yahweh's house, meaning the temple of God. Then he sent one of his friends, Eliakim, and Shebna the scribe, and also the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So Isaiah was alive at this time. Isaiah was one of the major prophets in Israel's history. He obviously wrote the book of Isaiah. He had many, many prophecies about the coming birth of Jesus, some which are so famous that, we talk about them at Christmas. Unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government will be on his shoulders, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Those were the words of Isaiah, among many, many other very famous prophecies that Isaiah was speaking and writing at the time. Isaiah was alive at this moment in Judah's history. So the king of Judah, Hezekiah, sends his messengers and his friends to Isaiah, so that Isaiah can inquire of God for him. And he tells his friends to say these words to Isaiah. "It may be that Yahweh your God will hear all the words of the Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria, his master, has sent to defy the living God, and will rebuke the words which Yahweh your God has heard. Therefore, Isaiah, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left." So you can see there that Hezekiah was extremely distressed. He truly believed that Judah was about to be destroyed because Israel to the north was destroyed. So I'm sure Hezekiah was terrified that what happened to Israel was about to happen to Judah as well. But he holds out a little bit of hope that God will hear the blasphemies that the Rabshakeh said and not allow Assyria to come into Judah and completely destroy it. So I'm going to read some of this blaspheme in the previous chapter. 2 Kings 18, 28 through 35 says, and I quote, "Then the Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and spoke, saying, Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. The king says, Don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of his hand. Don't let Hezekiah make you trust in Yahweh, saying, Yahweh will surely deliver us, and this city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Don't listen to Hezekiah, for the king of Assyria says, make your peace with me, and come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one from his own fig tree, and every one drink from his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land just like your own, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that you may live and not die. Don't listen to Hezekiah when he persuades you, saying, Yahweh will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the other nations ever delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Eva? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of the countries that have delivered their country out of my hand, that Yahweh should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? And man, those are some fighting words there, because the Rabshakeh was being very, very belligerent towards Yahweh and saying that Yahweh was just like all of these other gods of all these other lands. But God is very clear, and this is something he says to everybody, not just his own people in Israel, but he would say this to everybody. He said, I am the only God. Worship me. That was God's message to everybody. From the very beginning of time, there is no other God than me, Yahweh. But yet this Rabshakeh was saying, no, Yahweh is just like all these other ones. He's not going to be able to do anything to help you, because what other God was able to help its people? So those were some of the blasphemies that the Rabshakeh was saying, but that wasn't it. Actually, the king of Assyria was also sending letters to Hezekiah as well, saying that there's no way that Yahweh could ever save Judah out of his hand. And since Hezekiah, was receiving all of these blasphemous letters and hearing these blasphemous reports, he was hoping that God would also hear that and deliver Judah out of the hand of Assyria, even though Israel fell to Assyria. So King Hezekiah sends his messengers to Isaiah with this message. He says, today is a day of trouble, of rebuke, and of rejection, for the children have come to the point of birth, but there is no strength to deliver them. And that was an old-fashioned saying that meant that calamity is upon us, basically. Just as if a mother was about to give birth to a baby but didn't have enough strength to actually produce that baby, both she and the baby would die. So it was a common expression of imminent doom, basically. So the king's servants take this message of doom to the prophet Isaiah, and Isaiah listens to their words. And in verse 6, he has a prophecy for them. Isaiah says to them, tell your master this. Yahweh says, don't be afraid of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, and he will hear news, and he will return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So God gives this prophecy to Isaiah, telling King Hezekiah that he has nothing to fear, especially from the Rabshakeh, because the Rabshakeh is going to fall by the sword in his own land. He's not even going to battle it out with the city of Jerusalem. So Hezekiah does not have to fear this Rabshakeh. So that's good news for Hezekiah. But this is not the only prophecy that God gives Isaiah about the Assyrian army. Not only is God going to punish the Rabshakeh, but eventually, according to Isaiah 10:12-17, God is also going to punish the king of Assyria as well. So let's go ahead and read that. This is from the NIV version. Once again, Isaiah 10:12-17. It says, when the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty look in his eyes. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, because I have understanding. I removed the boundaries of nations. I plundered their treasures. Like a mighty one, I subdued their kings. As one reaches into a nest, so my hand reached for the wealth of the nations. And as people gathered abandoned eggs, so I gathered all the countries. Not one flapped a wing or opened its mouth to chirp. And I'm going to pause right there for a second, because that is what the king of Assyria is saying about himself. He's like, yeah, like a mighty one, like a god myself. I went into other lands. I removed their borders. I took them for myself. Just as somebody reaches their hands into a nest to take the bird's eggs and the bird can do nothing about it, that is exactly what I am like. I am as powerful as a god. And so here's how God responds to the king of Assyria in verse 15. God says, "Does the axe rise itself above the person who swings it, or the saw boast against the one who uses it? As if a rod were to wield the person who lifts it up, or a club brandish the one who is not wood. Therefore the Lord Almighty, will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors. Under his pomp, a fire will be kindled, like a blazing flame. The light of Israel will become a fire, their Holy One a flame. In a single day it will burn and consume his thorns and his briars." So basically what God is saying is he's calling the king of Assyria a tool. I have a tool bag actually right in my closet. I'm looking at it currently because my closet door is open. And, those tools, I almost never touch them. Other than like a couple times a year, maybe to like hang a picture or something. But otherwise, my tools pretty much never get used. And, they're in the exact same position as I left them last time. They have not moved. They cannot move unless I tell them to move, unless I physically pick them up and use them. These tools are just sitting there waiting for me to use them once again. And that is basically what God is calling the king of Assyria. He's like, does the axe rise itself up above the person who swings it, or the saw boast against the person who uses it? Just as those tools, an axe and a saw, cannot really do anything on their own, and also cannot rise up against the person who wields them. Like an axe does not become angry at its owner and start like swinging itself at the owner. It's not possible. The king of Assyria is trying to rise up against God, saying, I am so much greater than God. I am doing what I want to do. But God is saying to the king of Assyria, you cannot boast against me or rise up against me. And so I'm going to show to you. I am going to punish you, king of Assyria, and show you who the real God really is. Is it you, king of Assyria, or is it me, Yahweh? And so that is the prophecy that God gives to Isaiah in Isaiah 10 regarding the king of Assyria. But going back to 2 Kings 19 and finishing our story, in verse 8, it mentions that the Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he heard that he had departed from Lachish. So it kind of sounds like God's prophecy against the Rabshakeh is coming true, because the king of Assyria left Lachish, which was a city in Judah, to go war against Libnah. And most likely, because the king of Assyria was gone, the Rabshakeh would also leave and follow the king of Syria to Libnah, right? So it sounds like the Rabshakeh is leaving, and it's possible that God's prophecy is coming true. But what happens is that the Rabshakeh hears that the Pharaoh is going to fight against the king of Assyria. You remember how we talked about how King Hezekiah tried to make a treaty and an alliance with the Pharaoh of Egypt because, King Hezekiah was obviously very scared for Judah, and Egypt was a very strong power and seemed to be a big threat to the Assyrians. So Hezekiah tried to make an alliance with Egypt. Well, it turns out that the Rabshakeh hears that this alliance has gone through. In verse 9, it says, the Rabshakeh heard that Tirhakah, the king of Ethiopia, has come out to fight against you. And you might be like, well, Jen, why does it say that Tirhakah is the king of Ethiopia if you just said he was the Pharaoh of Egypt? Well, because he was both, actually. So Tirhakah historically was the king of Ethiopia, but gained power in Egypt and became the Pharaoh of Egypt, I believe, in 609 BC. I'm pretty sure. He ruled in the 7th century BC, and he is mentioned a handful of times in scripture as well. But yeah, Tirhakah, he was both the king of Ethiopia and also the Pharaoh of Egypt. Somehow he gained a lot of power. It's actually possible that Egypt and Ethiopia for a while there kind of became like one nation is what I was reading, but I'm not really sure about all of that. I didn't do a lot of research on the topic. But yeah, so Tirhakah was in fact the king of Ethiopia, but also historically he was the Pharaoh of Egypt as well. So he decides to fight against the Assyrians. So the Rabshakeh hears about this. He gets super angry at Hezekiah because Hezekiah was the one who was trying to form this alliance between, Judah and Egypt. So it says the Rabshakeh sends a messenger to Hezekiah in verse 10. He says, tell Hezekiah, king of Judah, this. Don't let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands by destroying them utterly. Will you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, which my fathers have destroyed? Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the children of Eden who are in Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, and of Hena, and of Eva? So the Rabshakeh sends this very cruel letter to Hezekiah saying, first and foremost, don't trust your God because he is no better than any of the other gods. Secondly, the king of Assyria is way stronger than you and he is going to succeed and he's going to kill you because where are the other kings of all these other nations, that were once so prominent? The kings are all dead, and soon, Hezekiah, you will be dead just like them. It says in verse 14, Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. So Hezekiah goes up into Yahweh's house and spread it before Yahweh. And Hezekiah prayed before Yahweh, and he said, Yahweh, God of Israel, you are enthroned above the cherubim. You are God, even you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. So Hezekiah has a very different response to this letter than previous kings before him would have had. The previous kings before him would have, done sacrifices to their false idols or tried to, reach out to neighboring nations to help them, or, stripped God's temple of all of its gold and given it away. Something along those lines. And I'm not saying Hezekiah was perfect because he did do some of those things, right? But when push came to shove, Hezekiah called out to God. He went into God's temple. He bowed down and prayed before Yahweh, and he said, God, you are God, not just of Israel, but you are God of every single nation, even the Assyrian nation. And he says, incline your ear, Yahweh, and hear. Open up your eyes, Yahweh, and see. Hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to defy the living God. Truly, Yahweh, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. But they were no gods. They were the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore, they have destroyed them. Now, therefore, Yahweh, our God, save us, I beg you, out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth will know that you, Yahweh, are God alone. And wow, what a beautiful prayer, because Hezekiah touches on all the important principles of prayer right here. First, he acknowledges his faith in God. Secondly, he rejects all other gods and tells God, God, you are the only God on earth. All of these other gods of the nations, they are nothing but wood and stone. So of course the king of Assyria has prevailed against them because they were nothing gods, but you are the real God. Thirdly, Hezekiah worships God. And fourthly, Hezekiah expresses a need to God. And those are all the four most important principles of prayer. Once again, having faith in God, realizing your dependence on him. Secondly, believing that God is the only true God and he's the only one you're going to worship. Thirdly, giving praise and honor to God. And fourthly, asking God for what you need. So we're going to see how God responds to this prayer of Hezekiah, because it seemed like, Assyria possibly was leaving Judah, and Judah was going to see relief from this issue that was so bad only moments before. But now this issue is once again in their face all over again because of that bad alliance they made with Egypt. It's very possible, actually, if Hezekiah had not tried to make that alliance with Egypt, that Sennacherib would have left Judah alone, gone off and done other things around the world. But because of the alliance between Judah and Egypt at that moment, this makes the king of Assyria and the Rabshakeh so much more infuriated against Judah that they decide that they are going to completely destroy it. So we're going to talk about how God responds to Hezekiah's prayer and what happens to the Assyrians on Wednesday. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I certainly enjoyed talking about this, and we're going to discuss more about 2 Kings 19 on Wednesday, which I'm looking forward to as well. Like I said, this is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. But faithful listeners, if you haven't gotten a chance to check out the new t-shirts in the merch shop, you absolutely should, because I updated the Lion of Judah tee, which is a very cool tee in my opinion. It is a lion that I drew myself, and it has the verse from Revelation 5:5 on it, which says, "The Lion of Judah, he has overcome." It's a really cool t-shirt and one of my favorites. And I also now have the Crazy t-shirt, spelled T-E-A, right, for you crazy tea drinkers. So that is also available, and you should check out those 2 new t-shirts. But also the old style Lion of Judah tee is on sale now. So if you want to grab it, this is going to be the last of all the Lion of Judah tees of that style that I do. If you would like one, you got to grab one before they are gone. All of that is linked in the description of this episode. Faithful listeners, have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning for an episode from Ephesians. Until tomorrow, happy listening, and God bless.